Everyone was shocked when Kenneth Copeland recently spoke out about the passing of his cherished wife, Gloria. For many years, Gloria's personal life was kept a secret. Kenneth is also sharing the secrets that were kept secret with everyone now that she is deceased. Gloria withheld what from everyone? When no one was looking, what was she like? You won't be able to speak after what they say. As we investigate the now emerging reality, stay tuned. Kenneth Copeland was standing at the platform, and it was really thrilling. He felt as though he were carrying the burden of the moment. The assembly was full of people who had long adored him and his late wife, Gloria. They were aware that something had changed. This was neither a well-executed homage to a devoted woman nor your average irate lecture. This time, Kenneth came coming to discuss a far more significant topic that had been kept under wraps for many years. Nobody was prepared for what he said when he spoke. He was obviously exhausted because his voice was quieter than usual. "I've been quiet for a long time," he remarked. He added, "But I think it's time to tell the truth." The entire room fell silent, and everyone was waiting for him to say something. Kenneth was not present to offer Gloria praise or to express the opinions that everyone held about her. He had a responsibility to be honest with them about their marriage. That fact had never occurred to anyone, not even their closest supporters. Kenneth didn't mean to offend Gloria with his statement. Absolutely not. He had no intention of damaging her name or the foundation she had established. However, as he spoke, it became evident that the fairy tale marriage was not what it first appeared to be. He informed them that despite the smiles on stage and in the photos, their marriage had been far more challenging. Fights had occurred, but they had not been physical. They were very sentimental. These in-depth and incisive discussions were never witnessed. He described how, when no one was present, Gloria, the woman who everyone believed to be the epitome of grace and elegance, could be cruel and mean-spirited. She might use words as weapons, Kenneth acknowledged. As he said, he was neither furious nor angry. There was sorrow in his voice as he said, "I tried to fight back, but most of the time I gave up." Sadness for the years he had been silent, attempting to maintain the facade of a happy marriage when he was in deep internal pain. Then, Kendall said that he had remained silent for many years, even if it meant jeopardizing his own mental health. He felt that love required protecting Gloria's reputation and preventing the public from witnessing their marriage. "I stayed silent because I thought it was what love required," he said. He was sincerely sorry for all the years he had wasted acting, but that was all he meant when he added, "But in silence I buried a piece of myself." He claimed that people had never recognized their true issues, the moments of sadness and rage that were a part of their everyday existence. Kenneth didn't want to forget his wife, whatever the pain it caused. Kenneth Copeland eventually broke the decades-long quiet by stating unequivocally, "This isn't meant to put her down." The confession weighed heavy in the air. It's to be honest, to show that even in ministry, even in marriage, there can be pain, and that pain deserves to be spoken out loud. For many years, Gloria and Kenneth Copeland cohabitated and worked together. They experienced both periods of tremendous achievement and periods of excruciating bodily and emotional suffering during that time. Kenneth didn't limit his discussion of those years to the enjoyable moments that were shared by all. Rather, he revealed to the public their marriage's vulnerable, unvarnished side, which no one else had ever seen. Kenneth had always been seen as a mythological character, a strong, devout man who taught others about success, wealth, and power. However, he began to display a side of himself that few had before witnessed when he took the stage. A man who had spent years striving to maintain his public persona and personal life while bearing severe burdens in quiet. Pushing against the crowd, Kenneth's voice was hardly more than a whisper. "I know what you all saw," he mentioned. But beneath that smile, things weren't always as good as they appeared. "You saw us standing there together, preaching and giving. You hope while smiling." He paused to process what had been said. The audience remained still and motionless while he talked. Kenneth described the initial excitement and intensity of their marriage. A major objective for both of them was to change the world. Their dreams and aspirations were lofty. They wanted to influence the world with their words and ideals. Together, they created a company that would reach a large audience. Since they both had the same objective, they stood next to one another. Initially, it appeared that everything would go according to plan. However, their relationship began to exhibit indications of deterioration over time. "Gloria was a fire," Kenneth remarked, his voice full of adoration. Kenneth acknowledged that their marriage had occasionally suffered as a result of Gloria's fiery personality, which had given her strength on stage. She was fierce, passionate, and not afraid of anyone or anything. That's what I loved about her. That fire made her one of the most powerful voices in Christian ministry. But behind closed doors, that same fire could burn, and it wasn't always easy to handle. She was harsh, rude, and unpleasant at times. Sometimes her words were more painful than a knife. Kenneth clarified that their disagreements went beyond trivial matters. They were intense arguments that occasionally revolved over authority, their children, or the religion itself. "I remember nights when the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife," he stated. His voice trembled slightly as he described how the pressure of maintaining appearances had worn him down. "We would argue about everything, big and small, and that's when I realized how far apart we had become. I would wonder if the woman I stood next to on stage, who preached with such power, was the same person I came home to. Maintaining a flawless image and showcasing the ideal coupling to the public was too much pressure. When they took the stage, it was crucial that they always had a broad smile on their faces. Even when they were alone themselves, they struggled to maintain their composure." His voice was firm, but quiet, as he continued. "I remember there were nights when I would go to bed alone. We would fight, and then we wouldn't speak for days. And when we did, it was like walking on eggshells. But the moment the cameras turned on, we knew how to put on a show. We were professionals. We knew how to act like everything was fine. There were moments," he stated, "when I felt utterly exhausted by the constant need to keep up the facade. I'm not talking about just the ministry," he explained. "I'm referring to our marriage, our ministry, and our lives. Everything was connected. I eventually started to wonder if I had been so engrossed in it all that I had lost myself." He admitted that there were times when he felt emotionally numb, going through the motions of his life without truly feeling anything. He spoke about how, as the years went on, Gloria's temper became harder to manage. She could explode over the smallest things. A missed appointment, a misplaced paper. Something as simple as the wrong tone in my voice would set her off. And when she got angry, she could make the walls shake with the force of it. There were nights when I would sleep in the guest room just to avoid the confrontation. It wasn't peaceful, but I thought that was what love was. Enduring, pushing through for the sake of the ministry, for the sake of the image we had built. As Kenneth shared his pain, there was no anger in his words, just deep sorrow. I feared her rage. He admitted, "I wasn't happy with myself. There were days when I arrived home unsure of what to anticipate. Would she be calm and affectionate? Or would I need to exercise caution once more?" While he considered it, his hands ached. I didn't want to divide up the church, the family, or anything else. And I didn't want to leave her. But in the process, I lost a part of who I was. He described how frightening and agonizing it was to keep this fear and suffering to himself. I would stand in front of thousands of people preaching about God's love and how marriage should reflect that love, he stated. On the inside, though, I felt hollow. I kept everything inside. I didn't ask for help. I didn't know how to ask for help. Kenneth paused, gathering his thoughts before he spoke again, this time with a newfound sense of clarity. There were moments of real beauty, too, he remarked in a more reserved tone. He then reflected on how they had presented the world with a flawless image of their lives for years, with everything appearing to be ideal. We had great times, quiet mornings spent laughing and sipping coffee together. There were trips when we acted like teenagers again, but those times were getting fewer and farther between, and I felt myself slowly changing into someone I didn't recognize. But now that Gloria was gone, Kenneth could finally be honest. In reality, the perfect marriage wasn't ideal. They were struggling in their marriage, both physically and emotionally, and neither of them knew how to make things better. It was a real marriage, he stated, but it was so hard and messy. Kenneth concluded his story with the words, "Sometimes beautiful, sometimes painful." It seemed as though the burden of the past had been somewhat lifted. He had endured it alone for so long. He could now speak the truth for the first time. "I don't feel bad about the years," he replied. Kenneth Copeland, a steadfast Christian faith leader, continued, "I regret the silence. I regret that we didn't let anyone in, that we didn't let our struggles be seen for what they were. We pretended for so long that everything was fine, but the truth is, it wasn't." He and his wife Gloria were long regarded as the perfect pair, an example of a contented and devoted marriage. As the creators of one of the most significant missions, they were partners in every way. They collaborated to disseminate the message of prosperity and religion globally. But behind their offices' closed doors, something even more sinister was happening. For years, Ken had concealed this fact, a secret that would haunt him and force him to remain silent. Before cameras were rolling and their ministry was well known, this started in the early years of their marriage. The foundation of Kenneth and Gloria's partnership has always been mutual respect, a passion for their job, and a common vision for the future. They couldn't be separated at first. They were united by their love of God and desire to serve others. But as their workload increased, so did the associated stress. The stress of managing a charity that aids people worldwide, the frequent travel, and public speaking. As the years passed, these stressors began to negatively impact their marriage. Although he initially refused to acknowledge it, Kenneth would add, with a tone of admiration and a touch of melancholy, that Gloria was a fire dot. She possessed this power, which attracted others to her. She was the only one who could speak to a crowd. When she entered a room, you could always tell she was there. That fire was one of my favorite things about her. Over time, however, things with that fire altered, and I lost control. As they became more proficient at what they did, their private arguments became more intense. Kenneth would occasionally have to contend with both the growing tensions at home and the demands of the ministry. Once something he admired for its strength, Gloria's quick fury became something he feared. Her outbursts could occur at any moment. Big confrontations can start over minor annoyances. The silence that followed was deafening. There were several reasons why their relationship was in poor condition. The most painful issues were those that initially went unnoticed. Kenneth has always believed in the power of kindness and forgiveness. He had demonstrated how to live it for thousands of people, published books about it, and taught it in churches. He made an effort to do what he was told, but he found it difficult in his own marriage. He was accustomed to the melancholy, the deception, and the quiet that existed beneath the surface. He would suppress his emotions, swallow them, and continue working at the church since that was what was expected of him. That was what everyone wanted to see. However, the reality became indisputable after a few years. All along, there were indications. It began subtly, with odd phone calls, late-night conversations, and unjustified absences. He was certain it wasn't what he believed it to be, so he pushed them aside, even though he had seen them. Gloria was simply too busy to give a damn, he reminded himself. Ultimately, he had to support her since she was carrying out God's will. However, the sensation in my stomach persisted. He was aware that something wasn't quite right. Eventually, the truth struck him hard one night. He was in the kitchen as usual, sipping his coffee, when he heard Gloria in the adjacent room on the phone. She was enjoying herself. When she was with someone she cared about, she laughed like that. It was not the first time he had heard that chuckle. It was something he only did when he laughed. But this time, he had a weird feeling in his stomach. He was unaffected by the words. He was aware of what was happening. His chest ached in the center. He had suspected that something was amiss before. The weight of everything, however, struck him like a ton of bricks at this point. "I knew," he muttered. His voice broke for the first time as he relived that event. "I knew right then and there that I couldn't ignore it any longer. The signs were all there, but I didn't want to face it or believe it, because once you know for sure, you can't unknow it." Kenneth didn't discuss anything with Gloria that evening. He couldn't. He remained silent, concealed his suffering, and kept his doubts to himself. Because he was afraid of the consequences of telling anyone, he kept them hidden deep. They relied on the ministry for their livelihood, therefore he couldn't let a mood of uncertainty ruin everything. He decided to keep quiet. It appeared to be the safest option. He didn't care about the reality, so as the weeks and months passed, it became heavier. He noticed things he couldn't explain, and began to question whether he had been lying all along. People called each other late at night rather than having late-night conversations. The unexplained trips occurred increasingly frequently. The small lies grew into larger ones. John, however, remained silent. He couldn't bring himself to acknowledge it. He was unable to confront the true implications for his religion, his marriage, and their mission. But he would discover that quiet was not tranquility. It was poison. It was a protracted and agonizing death. One that destroyed his marriage, his identity, and his heart. "Everyone admired us as a couple," he said, feeling guilty. "I had to pretend. I had to act like everything was fine. I didn't know how to interrupt the silence, but it was killing me and us. We had to maintain that image no matter what." And then the truth came out in a way Kenneth never imagined possible. It wasn't until it was too late that he realized she wasn't simply having an affair. Everything they had fought for together was being attacked. Gloria's activities wrecked their marriage, their goal, and their existence, despite the fact that she concealed them for a long period. For so long, he had been in pain. Now that Gloria was gone, he was unable to suppress it any longer. Kenneth did not accuse or become irate in the final moments of his statement. He simply spoke the truth. His voice was raw and emotive as he said, "I loved her. I loved her no matter what." Love is facing the truth, even when it hurts, not pretending or hiding it. They might never completely get how significant the betrayal was to him, or how difficult it made him feel. The world may never fully understand the pain Kenneth went through in silence. He was free once he discovered the truth. From the lie they had lived, not from Gloria's memory. And that reality might, just might, be the first step toward healing his soul. The quiet in Kenneth Copeland's study was heavy. He'd been telling the truth to everyone for a few weeks now, and the weight of it still weighed heavily on his chest. The stillness no longer felt like the burden of secrecy that had followed him for so long. The silence that followed was one of relief that he had finally spoken the truth. Both he and those who had heard what he had spoken were still affected by it. He had found it difficult to discuss the negative aspects of his marriage that no one else had witnessed. He found it difficult to tear down the barricade that the years of silence had built around him. But as the days passed, he realized that the healing process had begun with his honest confession, not only for himself, but also for others whose lives his narrative had impacted. It was a strange sensation. He felt better and worse in this way, as though speaking the truth had shattered something inside of him and allowed something else to flourish. As the days passed, Kenneth considered how his life had changed. He had devoted so many years to maintaining the appearance of having the ideal church and marriage. However, he concealed his own issues and emotions in the process. At last, he felt as though he could release the guilt that had been preventing him from expressing his emotions and anguish for so long. For years, he pretended that everything was all right for the benefit of the people and the ministry. But after speaking the truth, it was too late to turn back. He had some power now that he was in the light. He was aware that sharing his tale was the correct thing to do, but he still found it difficult to accept the outcome. He wasn't prepared for the reactions he got. Since the truth was the only thing that could heal them, some people were there for them. Some were harsher, accusing him of damaging Gloria's memory and spreading filthy laundry. There was no simple solution to the hatred. He needed to remind himself that his recovery was independent of other people's opinions. He couldn't let other people's opinions to influence his path because it was his own. In the weeks that followed his disclosure of his secret, Kenneth started to feel odd. His life changed in prayer. He prayed to God for guidance and serenity more than he had in years. In addition to seeking forgiveness, he was also looking within for inner serenity. For the first time, he allowed himself to be depressed. Gloria wasn't the only person he lost. The reputation he had worked so hard to maintain was gone. Being free felt fantastic even if it ached. He realized that by giving up the deed, he was drawing nearer to God in a way that was founded on kindness rather than perfection. As Kenneth took in more information, he realized how much of his life had been molded by dread. He is afraid of failing, of being rejected, and of not living up to expectations. His religion had kept those concerns hidden for years. He believed that if he worked hard enough or prayed, everything would be all right. He understood it wasn't about pretending everything was all right, though, now that his heart was at peace. It was about letting go of his shortcomings, errors, and marital issues. He discovered that accepting the truth and allowing it to transform him into a better, more compassionate person was the only way to recover, rather than trying to hide it. Kenneth began to sense that his mission was evolving as well. People began to confide in him about their issues and emotions, and many expressed gratitude for his courage in speaking up. He always believed that serving as a preacher meant assisting others in finding hope and wellness. But this time, the fact that he was actually living that message felt more genuine than ever. He didn't need to be flawless or know every solution in order to do his job. The goal was to share the journey, the challenges, and the victories. He learned how to go through pain with others and show them the kindness he had discovered through his own recovery journey. During this period of personal transformation, Kenneth discovered that his religion had expanded in unexpected ways. He always believed that things could be changed by God's forgiveness and love. However, it appeared more genuine today. God seemed to be more involved in his life, one that was founded on his desire to be forthright and honest, rather than his success or notoriety. He learned from being humiliated by that experience that being genuine was more important for God's forgiveness than being flawless. Ken was aware that the road ahead would not be easy. Talking about things, healing, and having periods of uncertainty would still be difficult. For the first time, however, he felt like he was headed in the right direction, a path that would bring him a new beginning. Not everything was clear to him. Furthermore, he had no idea what would come next. But he was certain of one thing. He was set free by the truth. Being free allowed him to feel closer to God, others, and himself. As he looked to the future, Ken felt a sense of tranquility that had not been there in years. He was no longer attempting to maintain a facade or pretend to be someone he wasn't. All he did was have trust, and he was confident that God would continue to guide him down this new course. The fact that he had started down the path to recovery was sufficient. For the first time in a long time, he was at last comfortable with it, even if he had no idea what would happen. As long as he remained loyal to himself and his beliefs, he was confident that everything would turn out okay. Since learning the truth, Ken's entire life has changed. Although it broke him, it also gave him strength he never would have imagined. He no longer had to pretend to be flawless or tell lies in order to live his life. And he found a new purpose in life after gaining his freedom. A justification for being truthful, showing great compassion, and assisting others in discovering their own paths to healing and forgiveness.